Who are the two witnesses in Revelation 11? They are also called the two olive trees. Now, this is the bit of information that enables us to understand the identity of the two witnesses. For we read of an olive tree in Romans 11, 17 through 25. Now, there are two parts to this olive tree, this one olive tree, the Gentiles that are grafted in, and then the Jews or Israelites. So the one olive tree of two parts becomes the two olive trees of two parts, the Jews and the Gentiles, or you can say that the Christians and the Jews. Based on Romans 11, 17 through 25, we can say definitively that the two witnesses, or two olive trees, in Revelation 11 is not two individuals, but two groups, the Jews and the Christians. Then it says in Revelation 11 that the beast will rise out of the bottomless pit, and he will make war against the two witnesses, and he will kill them. What does this mean? The beast will rise out of the abyss. This is talking about the same beast. This rising out of the abyss by the beast refers to the return of the beast. And like it says in Revelation 17, verse 8 and 11, the beast was, and then is not, and then is again. It comes back into existence by rising out of the abyss. So the abyss is symbolic of non-existence. Now in Revelation 13, it speaks of the same beast rising out of the sea. Now the sea and the abyss are the same thing, and the bottomless pit and the abyss are the same thing. So the beast rising out of the abyss in Revelation 11, verse 7, equals the beast rising out of the sea in Revelation 13. And like I say, it also refers to Revelation 17. This beast with 7 heads and 10 horns goes back to the beast with 10 horns in Daniel 7, verse 7. It's simply the Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire. And then in verse 8 of Daniel 7, we see the beast does not exist because the territory of the Roman Empire is occupied by 10 nations ruled by 10 kings. Each nation is sovereign, and it has its own king. This is obviously not the Roman Empire, because in the time of the Roman Empire, there was one Caesar ruling at a time. But here, we see 10 kings ruling together concurrently, and so it's obvious that the Roman Empire has passed. But the important part is that this verse, verse 8 of Daniel 7, is talking about the return of the Roman Empire, because it talks about the conquest of these independent nations by Russia who takes away their sovereignty and puts these 10 nations back under one-man rule. Now, this return of one-man rule is really what it's talking about when it says the return of the empire. It doesn't really say the return of the empire. It says the return of the beast. But the beast refers to the empire. So the return of the beast is simply the return of the empire, Roman Empire, to the extent that one-man rule returns. But it's not Roman because Rome gets burned. That's Revelation 18, verse 10 and verse 17 and verse 19. In all three verses it says that Babylon gets burned in a single hour. It's talking about Rome because in First Peter chapter 5:13, he signs off, Peter does, by saying the church at Babylon salutes you. Now, he's at Rome, but he calls it Babylon for certain reasons. And long story short, this same thing is true in Revelation. When Revelation says Babylon, it means Rome, just like in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13, Babylon there simply means Rome. Anyway, the rise of the beast out of the abyss in the chapter we're concerned about, Revelation 11, because we're talking about the question of who are the two witnesses. We have the answer as the Christians and the Jews. Now, the beast rises out of the abyss. That's the return of their empire through the conquest of Europe by Russia. But the point that I'm making is, it says the beast will make war against the two witnesses. Now, it means that the Christians and the Jews, based on the fact that, in addition to the other basis, which is Romans 11, the other basis is Revelation 13. It says in Revelation 13:7 that the beast will make war against the saints. So this is the same thing that's going on in Revelation 7, where he makes war against the two witnesses. The two witnesses here and the saints over in Revelation 13:7 is the same thing. The saints there are the Christians, but Christians come from the Jews, the church, and Israel. The church is an extension of Israel. Anyway, the same theme is there, the Christians and the Jews, in both places. I want to emphasize that in Revelation 13, verse 7, that war is the war which is the conquest of Europe, which is by Russia, and it's the return of the Roman Empire to the extent that sovereign nations, 10 sovereign nations, actually there's more, but 10 are focused on. Sovereign nations lose their sovereignty. They're put back under one-man rule, and that's the return of the empire. Now this is supported when you look at Revelation 13. It says the whole crowns shift from the 7 heads, which is in Revelation 12. In Revelation 12, the 7 heads are crowned. And we know from Revelation 17 that the 7 heads are 7 hills upon which the woman sits, which is the great city. He's talking about Rome sitting on 7 hills. And so going back to Revelation 12, the 7 crowns are on the 7 hills, or 7 heads, 7 hills. So it's talking about the Roman Empire. So Revelation 12 is way back in the time of the Roman Empire. Now, in Revelation 13, there's a tremendous time shift, because the crowns shift from the 7 heads, 7 hills of Rome to the 10 horns, which are 10 lands, which become 10 sovereign nations with their own ruler. So Revelation 13 is the post-Roman time, way after the Roman Empire has fallen and split up, and it's modern Europe. And the rise of the beast is talking about the return of the beast, which comes via the conquest of Europe by Russian invasion, which is in Daniel 7, verse 8. It says, there's 10 horns, then another horn comes up among the 10 with great violence, because 3 horns are uprooted. It's talking about Russia invading these 10 horns. See, to come up among, if you change the 10 horns into 10 nations, when another nation comes up among 10, how can that be possible? Well, it's possible through invasion. See, you don't think of the 11th horn coming up among the 10 horns. You change the 10 horns over to 10 nations, and then when the 11th nation or 11th horn comes up among them, it's obvious that invasion is going on. Because if one nation comes up among 10 nations, that's invasion. So that's the way to do it. You have to change, you have to shift over from the symbolism to the nations, and then you have the come up among. And that's the way to get to the idea of invasion. See, these other people, Hal Lindsey, Tim LaHaye, Jack Van Eppe, none of them do that. They don't realize that this is clearly invasion in Daniel 7, verse 8. But this same theme, the return of the beast, a return of the Roman Empire, this is picked up again in Revelation 13:7. And here it clearly says war. W-A-R, war, war, war. So that's in Revelation 13:7 is actually a commentary or explanation for Daniel 7, verse 8. So because it says war in Revelation 13:7, we can use that as a basis for saying that definitively Daniel 7, verse 8 is talking about war, talking about invasion. And so I want to emphasize that. Let me emphasize one more time, because I like to learn through repetition. And just in case you like to learn through rote, let me emphasize that. Let me emphasize the parallel between Revelation 11:7 and Revelation 13:7. 13:7 says the saints. The beast makes war against the saints and overcomes them. And in Revelation 11, it says the beast makes war against the two witnesses and overcomes them and kills them. So there is a perfect parallel. And the saints would mean the Christians and the Jews. And on that basis, we can say that the two witnesses are clearly the Christians and the Jews. Let me throw in that the rapture in 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 16 through 18, actually through 5, verse 3. 4:16 through 5, verse 3. That's all one passage, and it has the rapture and the sudden destruction, which is the Russian invasion and the making of war by Russia, which means destruction. You know, war means bombs. Modern war means bombs, nuclear war, actually. And, well, Revelation 13 says, 13:7 says that the beast gains power over every nation through this war. So doesn't that sound like world war if you gain power over every nation, which means the world? And doesn't world war, isn't that suggestive of nuclear? So that's what's going on here. It doesn't say so, but America is involved because, well, like I say, Daniel 7, verse 8 is about Europe. But Europe and America are married through NATO. So the Russian attack on Europe, that's the tip of the iceberg, the implicit part, as opposed to explicit. The implicit part is the Russian attack on America, which is not even mentioned. Now, the Christians and the Jews that are caught up to heaven in Revelation 11. The two witnesses are caught up to heaven. That's verse 12. Now, this is actually a parallel passage to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16 through chapter 5, verse 3, which is a rapture passage. Now here it says they're killed, and then they're caught up 3 days later, 3.5 days later. Now, in order to make that fit the other passage, 1 Thessalonians, the idea is that it's not that they're caught up 3 days later, 3.5 days later, but that after 3.5 days, the Christians around the world will understand what has happened. They'll understand. The idea is that when Russian attack kills millions of people, the Christians that are killed will be raptured to heaven. And they'll be in the big cities of America and in the military bases, American military bases around the world, like in Okinawa, Japan, so that this rapture can be called, or can be described as happening from horizon to horizon, but it's not going to be inclusive. It's not going to be every Christian from one horizon to the other. It'll be Christians in America and Christians in Japan, Okinawa, but not Christians in South America or Africa. So there'll be plenty of Christians around the world that will be left to go through the short 5-month tribulation. 5 months is mentioned in Revelation 9, verse 5 and 10. Now, these Christians that survive they won't know immediately, they won't realize immediately what has happened to the Christians that have gotten killed, the Christians and the Jews, which are the two witnesses that have been called up to heaven. But after 3.5 days, the Christians around the world will realize, they'll go to their Bibles and they'll pray and they'll study their Bibles and they'll look at the passage in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 through 5. They'll see that sudden destruction is connected to the rapture. And they'll go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 3, where it says the rapture happens at the time of the revealing of the man of sin. He is revealed as the son of destruction, which means he is revealed as the destroyer. So the idea is the rapture occurs when a certain man becomes the destroyer by doing what? By destroying. By destroying what? By destroying the cities of the Christian nations. And so he destroys people. He causes the Christians and the Jews in the cities of America to be raptured to heaven at death. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4:18, it says, "Comfort one another with these words." It's referring to the words of verse 16 and 17, where it says that the dead in Christ will rise first, and then the people that are alive at the time of the rapture, they'll be caught up to heaven and be with the Lord and with the dead in Christ. Now, the idea is that Christians around the world, after the Russian attack occurs, they will look at these two verses, 16 and 17, and they will be comforted by the fact that at the time of the sudden destruction, the Christians and the Jews were caught up to meet the dead in Christ, those that sleep in Jesus. And the dead in Christ, the same thing. The dead in Christ come at the rapture as the angels. They're the angels that are mentioned in Matthew 24, verse 30 through 31. And they don't rise out of graves at the rapture, because there's no need for the dust in the graves to reform or to reconstitute as fleshly bodies that then come out of the graves and drill through 6 feet of dirt and then rise to heaven. And as they're rising to heaven, to turn into spiritual bodies, there's no need for all that. The rising first of the dead in Christ occurs first in the sense of before the rapture. Before the rapture. Not at the rapture, but before the rapture. Take, for example, the Apostle Paul. He was stoned to death. I think it was Acts 14, verse 17. Chapter 17, verse 19. You'll have to look that up. But the idea is, Bible scholars tell us that it was then that he was caught up to the third heaven, which he talks about in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 2 through 4. He says, "I knew a man who was caught up to the third heaven, and he saw things that were not lawful for him to come back to earth and to report upon." And the idea is that he's talking about himself. but he wants to be modest, so he doesn't say, I was caught up to the third heaven. He puts it in the third person. But he's talking about himself, and what's the point? The point is he was raptured. He was caught up. He rose first. First. Not at the rapture in the end time, but first in the sense that it happened when he died. When a Christian dies, they're raptured to heaven. They're caught up. They rise first. And don't expect Christians to come out of graves at the time of the rapture. It's not going to happen. This is confirmed. This idea that the rapture happens at death is confirmed in Revelation 11. It says the two witnesses are killed. Only later, only then. Well, okay, it says later, but it means then. Only then, only through death, do they get raptured or caught up. And so there's that bit of confirmation, not terribly convincing. But if you want to email me, I would appreciate it very much. And also, I ask that you look at the caption or description below this video. I try to add a long caption or description for the sake of explaining what is said on the video. And I ask that you write, take down. How can I say it? You highlight it and you make copies and you transfer it to paper, because computers will be disabled, at least in America and Europe. And so if you have computers, in some other country, then that's fine. You probably won't have EMP, electromagnetic pulse, in South America or Africa or a large part of Asia or Australia. Please email me at joegrace@gmail.com. JOEGRACE.